Every once in a while, we find ourselves standing in front of a masterpiece of creativity. And every once in a while, we find ourselves surrounded by idiots. Now, I don't say that lightly. I don't believe people are dumb. But I do believe people allow their ideologies and their biases and their emotions to cloud their judgment. We've seen it before with movies, where people have claimed their ideologies or their biases, whatever may have you, is what made a story a bad one. We've even seen it with comedians, with their stand-up specials that are being rated as 0% simply because the reviewers can. And once again, we find ourselves with a video game this time. Only this time, it's actually incredibly blatant how people are set out to destroy something that's good, simply because they are unhappy. How can one take a story so intricately woven, so detailed, so layered, so many emotions being pulled so often, and yet you rate it bad because an event made you, what, sad? Made you feel something? Well, you shouldn't be reviewing things to begin with if you let your judgment get clouded simply because you're whiny. So, I figured I'd make a little review, little rant, to clear some things up about this game. So let's just jump on in, because there are a lot of bad reviewers out there spouting misinformation, and the longer they are left to circulate unchecked, the more people are going to be tricked into believing that this is not actually an incredible story. Warning, spoilers will be appearing from this point forward, both through the video clips that will be presented and the discussion that is going forward. If you would like to avoid them and just get to the final rating of the game, please skip to the end. If you're here because you would like to see something other than a simple-minded bad review and want to hear an actual honest opinion that will actually go in depth about plot points and explanations and actually have a discussion instead of whining because that's what everyone else is doing, then let's just continue on. To start off on the bad reviews, there are a couple of points that I keep hearing people make that I need to dismantle simply because the points that they make not only are whiny, they just don't make sense as to why they're as big of an issue as they tend to make them. So it would only make sense to take the most common points and dig deep into the reasons why they may have come to that conclusion and to give an even more valid reason as to why they are wrong. So hopefully it doesn't take too long. The first point that we need to discuss is Joel deserved better. No, he did not deserve better. He received an end that was not only understandable, given the world that he lives in, although yes, shocking, emotional, and most of all heartbreaking, it was also something you had to know was a possibility. After choosing the life of one girl over the lives of literally everyone else who could have been saved or protected with a potential vaccine, you had to know that an end like the one we received was possible from the moment he slaughtered the room full of surgeons. I mean, he even killed Queen Firefly herself, Marlene. In fact, myself and many of the people whom I know all believed that it was going to be some kind of militarized, tactically sound Firefly attack in retribution for what Joel did to them at the hospital. They even go so far as to mention it having been a possibility through a small piece of dialogue on a voice recorder that is found later on in the game. But they didn't go that route. And that just makes the situation even more grim, emotional, and unique. And also proves that the writers are more than capable of using revenge as a plot device correctly, and instead of just being lazy and simply following the current winning method of a revenge arc, John Wick, and actually putting effort into making it stand apart from the rest, that you can actually be successful at doing so. There is more to be said about Abby and her motives, but for now, let's just stay on the topic of Joel. Skip ahead if you would only like to hear about Abby. The way he died felt contrived, simply a device of which to push the revenge story of the sequel forward and not actually in line with the characters' personalities. No, just no. Simply believing that they dumbed down the characters Joel and Tommy to simply get them to the ambush early for, shock value, already proves that you need to take a step back and look at the story from the outside. The first very important thing most people need to realize in this day and age is, this is not your story. You don't get to decide what happens to who. You didn't create these characters, nor did you create the world that they live in or the story arc in which their lives unfold. You don't get to claim what the characters would or would not have done. Now let me be clear. It makes sense to not like a story. Not every story is for everyone. There are many works, movie, book, video game alike, that I personally am not a fan of. I also get in not enjoying character development within a story. Again, I have felt the same way. But what does not make sense is allowing your dislike of a single moment, or a single character for that matter, to irreversibly cloud your opinion of the following 20 hours or so of gameplay and story that continues to feed you with new, valid, and actually well thought out plot points from motive to world building to character development and more. And if you're basing your dislike on the opinion of other people, from content creators you admire or just simply the biggest headline you see in your feed, to compound or in what realistically is probably most cases, make the decision for you, you definitely need to take a step back and start to learn how to think for yourself. Because having watched multiple reviews, I've noticed a trend. Not only do they complain about the same talking points that everyone else is, they take no effort to explain or dig deeper into why they're complaining. They simply just repeat what another reviewer has said, or what a more popular reviewer has said. They'd have no way of thinking for themselves. Again, this is not your story. This is Joel and Ellie's story, with the newest edition of Abby and eventually Lev. If you're feeling offended or called out right now because of that rant, I've got some bad news for you. But let's not dwell and just continue on. Another point, Joel was super smart and cautious of everyone in the first game. He even ran a limping guy over simply because he didn't trust it. It makes no sense that he would have followed Abby to the mansion so easily, and he would never have went inside once he saw that there was nearly a dozen of them there. So, let's start this off piece by piece. Yes, Joel was smart. Having survived more than 20 years in the outbreak, it is made clear that he is very resourceful, intelligent, and many-layered. Many layers which we do not actually even get to see. And yes, he was very cautious of everyone in the beginning. And again, yes, he did run a guy over. But he did not run him over because he simply didn't trust him. He ran him over because Joel at one point in time was actually a hunter himself. It is openly applied in both dialogue, whether linear or optional, and in written collectibles that in the first game he and Tommy both descended into the darker nature of survival, even going so far as to do the exact same trick, feigning injury to gain help, and then ambush the unsuspecting persons. Here's a little clip to show you what I'm talking about.
How did you know?
Know what?
About the ambush?
I've been on both sides.
Oh. So, you kill a lot of innocent people? I'll take that as a yes.
Take it however you want.
Yet, another reason why before using information to further an incredibly biased and uninformed point, you should really do the research to make sure what you're saying can't be so easily invalidated with a 15-second clip of dialogue. On the same point, Joel was so cautious he didn't even trust Henry or Sam. Wrong again. Henry attacks Joel's first, causing the animosity, but is quickly diffused and they begin to chat casually. Don't believe me? Check it out.
Leave him alone.
Easy, son. Just take it easy.
It's all right. They're not the bad guys. Lower the gun.
And now, let's go back to the original point of Joel was too smart and cautious to trust Abby and just walk into the camp with their friends. He and Tommy would never have fallen for that, right? And the writers simply made him dumber to move the plot along. Do I even need to say it?
I'm Henry. This is Sam. I think I caught your name was Joel.
Ellie.
How many are with you?
Welcome to my office.
How long have you guys been holed up in here?
A few days. We found a bit of food, though. Here.
Blueberries. Found a whole stash of them. You want some?
No.
Hey, man, relax. We're safe.
So why haven't you left?
Been waiting for the right opportunity.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
How long y'all been here?
Since yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yep.
What are y'all doing out this way?
I'm just passing through. You two live nearby?
We do. A few hours down the hill. Y'all should come back with us, restock before you head out.
Appreciate it. I'm Mel, by the way.
Tommy, this is my brother.
Joe.
Now, despite being virtually identical scenarios, why is one completely fine and the other so out of character that it ruins the game? In what world does that make sense? They both just met, a meeting which was founded under intense circumstances. Henry attacked Joel, and Joel saved Abby from a swarm of infected. Both events play a small role in lowering the belief that the other side meant them harm. Joel and company then continue to follow this new character to their home, their office, their hovel, whatever term you wish to use to describe their final destination. One is nothing more than filler. Just chatter to help Joel and Ellie find similarities in an adult-child group like themselves, and to continue to add another plot point to continue along on your story. And the other incites a myriad of emotion, from disbelief to rage to heartache, sadness, denial, regret, grief, just too many to count at the loss of someone who was loved. A surge of emotion felt so rapidly and so vividly that even daring to try to take away from the tragic beauty of this plot point simply because it made you uncomfortable is unacceptable. And quite frankly, anyone who has complained about this game because of the points that I've made thus far and since dismantled should be ashamed of themselves. But I can go on and on and on about this, and in the interest of not making a week-long video, let's just hop on over to the next talking point, shall we? And before anyone attempts to claim that I didn't like Joel or anything of that nature, I'm just going to put that to rest real quick. First off, let's be really clear. I did not want Joel to die. Joel was one of my favorite male protagonists in any story ever. I'm not going to spend an obscene amount of time justifying my love for Joel as a character, but he was and will most likely always remain one of my favorites. So naturally, I was very upset when his death became a reality. As Ellie was held down to watch Abby with the golf club, I felt as though I was being held down right beside her, forced to watch someone I truly felt and cared for get snuffed out right before my very eyes. If I could have, I would have changed the outcome in a heartbeat. Going into The Last of Us Part 2, I was thoroughly hoping that I was going to have an entire second game based around Joel and Ellie in the present. I was hoping that once completed, it would leave off an opening for a third one to once again follow the lives of both Joel and Ellie. But as has been said a few times in the video so far, it is not my story. Sure, I held a controller, so I was the vehicle that moved the characters along from point A to point B, but regardless of what I wanted, I could have cried and whined until my face turned blue. There was absolutely nothing I could have done to change the outcome. And it was in my best interest both to experience the story wholeheartedly and to remain truthful in my final verdict, to make it a point to stay free of emotional biases and clouded judgment. Unfortunately, there are many that are unable to do the same. But hopefully, if you're here watching this, you realize there are two sides to every coin. And while one side is nothing but lack of information and whining, the other side actually digs up information, goes into detail, and it can explain away any complaint that one can make that is obviously clouded. Having said that, there's plenty more that can be discussed regarding Joel in both his character and his story. But having spent the past near 15 minutes on this topic, I would like to move on to a few more unbelievably common and ridiculous complaints about the newest addition to the series, the seemingly most hated of all, Abby. And if you have anything to add about Joel or feel I've missed something along the way, or would simply like a further explanation, feel free to leave it in the comments. Now, let's start off the Abby discussion with one of the most common complaints you'll find across any review or rant video regarding The Last of Us Part 2, all of which are without any deeper investigation. Abby was shoehorned in. Now, I won't say you're wrong here. At the beginning, yes, she felt 100% like a forced character, completely out of left field, and simply a face to paint on the villain of this story. There were countless times, even before I knew who she was, or why she was a character I was now able to play as, where I openly said, why the fuck am I this random chick? At that point, we were all in the same boat. We bought a game where we were expecting to experience Joel and Ellie once again. It took 7 years to continue. Why am I somebody random within the first 30 minutes? It immediately felt out of place. But I pose another question this time to those who complain about Abby. Did you actually complete the story? Or did you play the first 2-3 hours, see what Abby had done to Joel, and then see her as nothing more than the piece of shit who killed him? Did you take the time to experience her story? Did you take the time to experience her character? Her flawed relationships? Her inability to fully let go of Owen even though she clearly needed to? Her struggle within her friendship with Mel due to obvious reasons? Her fear of heights? How about her strengths? Her personality? I shouldn't have to detail such clear-cut points about her story. How about her motive? At any point did it ever occur to you that the Last of Us world doesn't revolve solely around Joel and Ellie? Yes, they are pivotal characters whose presence throughout the first game cemented the deeply layered world of the original game as something that has not only tremendous value, but their bond was also the main catalyst that found so many players attaching themselves to. What people need to realize is that Abby killing Joel was simply the completion of her revenge plot, to get back at the person who killed her father, who in her story could be easily considered her Joel. It is quite literally the same goal we head off to as Ellie immediately afterwards, the same motive aimed for the same outcome. Did you take the time to view Abby as a character that lives simultaneously in this world? Or better yet, did you even try? The irony about saying that Abby is shoehorned in is, if that is true, after having completed the 25-hour story, then so is Jesse. So is Dina. I find it quite interesting that there's an incredible amount of hate for Abby, so much so that I've seen and heard people claim that they have more fun standing her still in front of infected and letting them eat her, or jumping off of balconies so that she falls to her death, or blowing themselves up repeatedly with their own explosives. I've even heard a few people claim that they will not finish the game simply because they refuse to play as Joel's killer. One more time for the sake of trying. I was right there with you. Initially, I despised Abby. Having yet to complete the story at the time and then being dropped into her shoes once again about halfway through the game, I too had her meet brutal and unforgiving ends a couple of times during Abby's Seattle Day 1 adventures. I even did it one final time, a bit later into Abby's playthrough with the sniper on the bridge sequence, for I knew that upon reaching the theater, things would go very bad, so I let Tommy snipe me out once for childish good measure. By this point, I had been Abby for a while now. Considering it started off on Seattle Day 1 and I left Ellie off on Seattle Day 3, it was obvious at this point that we were going to be spending the time leading up to the confrontation in the theater, this time, as Abby. Did I hate Abby? Still very much so. The Joel-loving side of me couldn't stand her. But the writers clearly wanted me to see or experience something specific by putting me in her shoes again, and so taking a step back and learning about Abby was all that was left. Quick side note about the reaction towards characters that I personally find hilarious. Those who have completed the game spend nearly 10 hours as Abby, learning an incredible amount about her, and people still claim to hate everything about this character. Yet, you spend barely an hour with Jesse, learning very little about him, besides a couple of things he likes to do, like play board games and get drunk, that he looked up to Joel, and that he had gotten Dina pregnant, and his death is the second most unacceptable thing to happen in the game. Granted, I am not trying to take away from Jesse. He was a solid character, and his death was very unfortunate. But to repeat what I had said about Joel, in a world where nobody is safe, anyone can die at literally any moment for any reason, once again, his death was understandable. Another point, the fact that Abby's dad was the surgeon whom Joel killed in the Firefly Hospital is random and forced and the dumbest way they could have built motive. Simple answer? Are you fucking kidding me? One of the most controversial, painstaking, morality-gutting moments in the original Last of Us is the moment when you walk into the operating room with the surgeons surrounding Ellie on the table. On one side, there are unarmed doctors whose intentions are completely benevolent. They intended on making a vaccine that could have potentially cured the infection and restarted civilization back to the way it was, 20 plus years ago. There isn't an inkling of malice in any of them. We even go on to learn that the main surgeon was briefly conflicted with taking the 14-year-old girl's life to create a vaccine. What was that quote that Ellie and Joel discussed through theme and then once even directly saying the words in the game? Oh yeah.
You sacrifice the few to save the many.
It's kind of shitty.
Yeah.
You have to sacrifice the few to save the many, which is exactly what this surgeon had intended on doing. Sacrifice the life of one girl to potentially save the rest of the world. I mean, anybody thinking of the fabled trolley question here? Or is that just me? But on the other side, the reality of the situation is, for Joel, and for anyone who is like myself for that matter, when you walk into that operating room, you don't see doctors hoping to change the world. You don't see the possibility of a vaccine curing the infection. You don't see the idea of life going back to the way it was before the infection. You don't see any of that. You see the girl, your Ellie, unconscious on a table, and a man you don't know standing over her with a scalpel. And you know that once he's done, the girl, the same one you crossed the country with, the same one who helped pull you out of your hardened, no faith in people, survival of the fittest is the only goal. Never again will there be an emotional connection with another person because of how easily they can be taken away and it will destroy me. Shell, she will be dead. And you can't let that happen. After spending the entire story killing the bad guys to protect the girl, nearly dying countless times along the way, mind you, a selfish decision hurls you and Joel, no stopping, into becoming the bad guy and killing the innocent for the first time since he's met her. To protect her. To save her. To even have the audacity to say that finding a way to use that motive is random or forced or stupid or whatever ridiculous nonsensical reason you may have to try to take away from such an incredibly well thought out connection is honestly the nail in the coffin against your own argument and proves you really need to reevaluate how you review stories to begin with. One should be ashamed for even attempting to devalue a connection of stories so deep simply because they are blinded by their own entitlement and already proven clouded evaluations. And if you're one of the many people who have actually never played the game and are complaining about the story or the pacing just because, you should quit while you're ahead. You're doing nothing but make a fool of yourself. Moral of the story? People really need to learn to get out of their own way and allow themselves the chance to absorb a story the way that was intended and not through the filter of bias or entitlement. But I need to end the discussion here. We're passing the 20-minute mark, and I initially only intended for this video to go on for about 10. If you made it all the way here, thank you for watching and listening to my rant. There were many other talking points that were supposed to be included, but it will be left out for now. If there are any points in the video that you would like to discuss further, or you would simply like a deeper exploration into the world and story of The Last of Us, please let me know in the comments. I do have another Last of Us related video in the works, which should be up in a few days, and this next one will be less about countering the ridiculousness of bad reviews, and more on the side of just admiring and exploring the beauty that is The Last of Us Part 2. So be sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed. And I hope that experiencing the story from a different perspective has opened your eyes, if only just a little bit. Again, thank you for watching.